Welcome back. Welcome back to the course Privacy and Security in Online Social Media. We are in week 9, part 2. I hope again you're able to digest the content as we see in the class. I hope you're able to make connections to the real world given the nature of the topic that we see in the class. What are we going to do this week, right? This week we're going to cover privacy laws, right? So I think one aspect of the privacy, if you remember last part, also I talked about how privacy is complex, interdisciplinary, right? We talked about different ways of conducting studies, users, data collection, and in that one of the things that I introduced was, we saw it from the week 1 also, why privacy is complex, hard to define all of that. It is also interdisciplinary, right? One of the aspects of privacy, why it is interdisciplinary, is because it also has the legal side of it. So you can look at the privacy as a problem of people, policy, technology. Last time we talked about again the one side of regulation that we have seen in the past is the legal side. Legal side, laws, judiciary, right? All of that. That's what we're going to see. It's an important aspect because many of the policies that are designed, many of the regulations that are set, at the end of the day, it has to become a law. When it becomes a law, it becomes very, the solutions become very impactful. The deterrent factors are very high. If there are no laws, if there are no expectations that this should be done in a way it is specified, the law of the land should play the role in defining how privacy is defined, how private expectations of privacy are, which aspects of privacy should you actually consider more, all of that. That's laid out well, then I think the whole system will work. The machinery will work well if the regulations are also properly aligned with the expectations of privacy with what the technologies are. Right, so that's why people, process, technology, you can even think of it as something like that, right? So, not this one. Right? There's a interrelation between people, process, and technology. So let's look at, so this lecture is going to be fully about laws across the world, privacy laws across the world, privacy laws in India, what are the different reasons, what are the different aspects of these laws, and some breaches that has happened, some highlights of the breaches that has happened because the violation of the law and all of that. That's what we're going to look at. Privacy laws around the world. Privacy laws and regulations vary widely throughout the world. It's a super, like the topic being complex and interdisciplinary and very hard, the laws are also very hard. It's not defined. I mean, you can't take, for example, a big difference, starking difference between US and Europe itself is that US does more a sector-specific laws, which is later in the slides you will see that US has a law for financial matters. It has a law for family. It has a law for internet, right? So the abstraction here is that the US has more sector-specific laws, whereas in the Europe it actually has a comprehensive privacy law, right? It has defined privacy very broadly, directives. It has given directives on what the definition of privacy is, how it should be done. everybody interprets it differently however they want and implement it. Interprets it in an appropriate way and then implements it. Right? So that's the huge difference if you really think about the two parts of the world defining privacy in a very different way. US sectors. Telecommunication, there'll be a privacy law. There'll be a privacy law for only children. Right? So that's a sector-specific clause. Whereas if you look at Europe, it's a broader definition of privacy. Everybody takes their understanding of what is defined and implements it. Same telecommunications, same children, same family, implements in different ways. Federal Trade Commission, which is in the US, has the jurisdictions over fraud and deceptive practices. Federal Communication Commissions regulates telecom. So the name itself suggests that FCC is for telecommunication, FTC is for frauds and the practices that one should actually follow in terms of privacy. Okay. European Data Protection Directive, right? That's the word I said earlier. Directive requires all European Union countries to adopt similar comprehensive privacy laws that recognizes privacy as a fundamental human right. Right? So that's the expectation that European Union has set for the citizens. Privacy commissions in each country. So the privacy commissioner, privacy commissions, they're all set up by each and every country. Each and every country can adapt their own ways of how the structure and everything is defined. One another thing that is very critical for people studying privacy is this GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, which is in Europe. We'll look at slightly more details later, but for now, it is one of the advanced regulation with respect to privacy. PDP, which is Personal Data Protection Bill in India, is something that is in the pipeline for us to see in India. Pipeline in terms of draft is written, reviews are gotten, still the process is going on in setting that PDP as a law. Okay, so that's the, let's say, 30,000 view of what privacy laws around the world are. Now let's just zoom into a little bit. US privacy laws, which is, as I said, it's a sector specific, right? It's fair credit reporting. Right? So credit in the US, the credit card usage is very high. This credit reporting, credit score, all of that is very critical. So there's an act passed to understand fair credit reporting of the users, of the citizens, how it is used, who should get access to it, what information should be collected, what information should be shared between organizations. All that is done in Fair Credit Reporting Act. Privacy Act, the word itself says, defining privacy, looking at what information is collected. If you just for a second pause the video and think about the privacy settings part and the lectures that we saw, that's what we are going to, that's what is connection here, which is if you think about the Facebook privacy policies that we discussed, different components of the privacy policy, a law would also talk about similar aspects of privacy, similar components of privacy. Right to Financial Privacy Act, Cable TV Privacy Act. So all of this is different acts that have been passed in the US for different privacy expectations, right? This one is cable TV, meaning during those days, cable TV was probably large. Today also we have, but it has advanced in many different ways. So this act is about Cable TV Privacy Act, what information again is collected, who has access to information, all that. Video Privacy Protection Act, Family Education Right to Privacy, Electronic Communication Privacy Act, Freedom of Information Act. So if you think about it again, right, video privacy, family, electronic communication, which is emails, all that, Freedom of Information Act, which is defining information that is collected about me, who has access to it, all of this taking different aspects of what all we do on internet, offline, all of that, different acts have been created for that. Right. Here are the three ones that are very, very relevant, and many a times these three acts will come in discussion of privacy laws, which is HIPAA, COPPA, and GLBA, health, children, and finance. Okay. So HIPAA is the protection of medical records, protect medical records and other individual identification health information, which is you go to the hospital, you get treatment for something, you come back. Now you go to the hospital again, you got the treatment from physician B. You go back to the hospital again, physician B is on leave. So can your information be shared with physician C, who can take a look at your records and give you recommendations or prescriptions, whatever? Is that possible? Can physician C get it? If she gets it, if she gets access to it, how much does she get access to it? All of that is what the HIPAA policy will define. I'm taking one example, but everything relevant to health data collected is what HIPAA will. For example, it is an hospital 1 that you're interacting with. Hospital 1 is interacting with data analytics company for doing the analysis of the patients coming to the hospital, what information can they share, how the information comes back, who gets access to this information, what anonymization techniques do they use to send the data. All these questions get answered in HIPAA. Very, very interesting act, and a lot of computer sciencey work has also happened on top of HIPAA, which is to convert these policies into some machine readable format. Right? One of it. Then the next one is COPPA, which is Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, which is specifically designed for children using online services. Websites that target children must obtain parental consent before collecting personal information from children under the age of 13. If you look at Google, if you look at YouTube, they would have specified that the parental control is needed for anybody who is less than 13, and parental controls can be set on their account so they don't get to see videos, they don't get to access information that is not age appropriate for them. Okay, so that's Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. Again, sector-wise. Graham-Lee-Bliley Act, which requires privacy policy disclosure and opt-out mechanisms for financial services institutions. As I said, GLB is specifically for financial services. In world of financial services, it's debit card, credit card, your bank account statement, your teller interactions, your online transactions. All of that is what financial services that we do, right? UPI payment from your bank, all that. So if you think of a act that allows protection for the information that transactions happen that you use on your financial services, is what the GLB is for. GLB is again a popular, meaning it's relevant to money, right? it is popular and it's very frequently discussed in terms of the privacy laws. Right? Health, of course, important one. Children, important, and financial, important. Right? Hope that gives you a sense of different. I mean, every single act that I've said before is probably relevant. For example, FERPA is another one, which is this is FERPA. Another one which allows family. For example, if you go to college and if you're paying fees, if you're studying, and if you have a grades, your feedback from the school in terms of grades, in terms of any other information about your sort of conduct on campus, how much can it be shared with your parents? Should the institute get a consent from the student to share the information to the parents? All of these questions are asked in FERPA. Take a look at these acts. If you think there's any act that you want to talk about in detail, any particular act that we should actually discuss it in the live session, please bring it. I'm happy to talk about it. So example of violation of HIPAA, right? There are, now let's look at examples of violation of these acts, if you were to think about it. So the first one, given that we talked about HIPAA, the first one is a lawsuit that demonstrates that if the information that the hospital has is shared with somebody else, breaches can happen. Right? This is a company wanted to build AI systems, and the hospital shared that information. So if you think this is exactly this point, right? Data analytics company getting access to the data from the hospital, what information should they get? If they share more information that the patients have not accepted, consented into, then I think it's not appropriate for the hospital to do that. Right, so we should actually protect that. We should have mechanisms by which the data is not getting shared. The lawsuit demonstrates the tension between building AI systems and protecting the privacy of patients, which is going to be a big tussle given that lots of new technologies can be built with the data that the hospitals have. Data sharing, patient records violated HIPAA in 2019, information that went to the company, unstripped identifiable data stamps, doctors' notes, all of that was part of the information that was shared, so it became a lawsuit. Now let's look at more violations. COPPA violations. So Google and YouTube will pay a record of 170 million for alleged violations of children's privacy law. So we are showing you exactly the laws that we saw: HIPAA, COPPA, right? So this one is YouTube collected data, kids' personal information without parental control, and then Google and YouTube to pay 136 million to FTC and about 34 million to New York, right? So because of the citizens of these cities, data were collected, so they had to pay money to these cities and organizations. Right. So the last one, GLBA violation, is I had a document processing company. I had a document processing center where the 60,000 customers' mortgage documents were provided to them. GLB again is because of financial connections, mortgage, contain sensitive information accessible to unauthorized users, right? Which is what privacy is all about. So these kind of violations trigger the discussion again about privacy more. And the goal for many of us, I mean, given that you're taking this class, you should also understand that, meaning all of this also has social media connection, right? Meaning if you go back to the different sectors that we talked about, many of them will end up having actually social media if you were to connect it now. Given that the acts were written at some point in time, there is always the question of social media not being part of it. But social media connection, right, to, for example, the GLB, for example, the HIPAA, right, data about patients going on social, right, what is the effect of it? COPPA, children's online privacy protection, meaning does company or a service, social media company has a service, and should they have this year limit of 13 years? If so, how do they make sure that that is not violated? All of that becomes the question for social media activities also, social media activities, social media organizations. Consumer privacy law, right? So this is very specific because there is a lot of discussion around this topic, and this act is also one of the progressive acts in terms of what are things they are doing, right? It's called California Consumer Privacy Act. Later, I also summarized the OECD FTC principles where you'll be able to make some connect to this. The right to know, right to delete, and right to opt out. Opt out is something we have discussed before. So it's the idea by which you're saying that, look, I don't want to be part of a mailing list. Can you please remove me from this mailing list? Right to delete, personal information collected. Amazon collected my credit card. Is there a way by which I can actually delete my credit card when my transaction is done? Amazon creates a mailing list of all the customers that they have to send out offers. Can I actually unsubscribe from that mailing list? That's opt-out. The right to know, personal information collected by business, how it is used and shared. Right? Policy, privacy policy should describe that. Right to non-discrimination, just because there is some characteristic difference between you accessing Facebook and me accessing Facebook, let's take because of geographic location, because of financial status, whatever, is the information presented to us different? Are we treated differently on these platforms? The right to correct inaccurate information that the businesses collects. Let's take my address is wrongly placed in Amazon. Can I go fix it? Right to limit the use and disclosure of information. They collected for X reason to deliver the book to me. Amazon collected my address. Can they actually use it for any other purposes? So this is what I said, OECD guidelines and FTC principles. These are two very, very good ways to think about, or the ways that they have summarized the privacy expectation. These are direct privacy implications topics, right? OECD guidelines, this is OECD in the Europe. They created a list of what any organization doing business should actually keep a watch on for information that they're collecting, right? Part of it's called fair information practices. Okay. Right, so this side I put the direct thing from the document here, but let's look at some let's look at all the guidelines, right? So these are 8 guidelines, 3, 6, 8 guidelines, which is collection limitation. They should collect information that the companies are collecting. They should be limited for whatever they are expected to do, and what information they really want for the business to run, right? They cannot be collecting, for example, just because I'm doing business on Amazon, they should not be collecting my Aadhaar card, right? Aadhaar card number, passport number. Data quality, whatever information I give the company, they should be able to keep it the way I have given the information. I gave them my information, I'm living in Hyderabad, that should not get changed. Purpose specification, they're collecting the address for delivering the book. They have to tell me that that's the reason they are collecting the address for doing the business. They collected it for delivering the book. It has to be limited only for that. They cannot be using it for selling me a product. Security safeguards, use methods for protecting the information in the server, different mechanisms that they should use to safeguard the data. Openness to allow users to be able to change any information if they find it wrong. Users should participate in any of the decision making or compliance or regulations that the company is thinking about. There should be a way by which users can give feedback about it. Accountability if something goes wrong, like for example YouTube, the example that we saw, if Google example that we saw, if a breach happens, what should be the way in which the company would react to it, who's accountable for whatever happens. In terms of financial obligations, in terms of other ways by which these companies are made accountable for whatever happens. So that's OECD guidelines. Again, collection limitation, data quality, purpose specification, use limitation, safeguards, openness, individual participation, and accountability. Now, if you just think about it, this was from the Europe, and then US said that, look, can we actually think about it in slightly more smaller way, merge all the expectations that is needed, but still get a list. This is what FTC did, which is notice and disclosure, very connected to the earlier. So all of this 5 is actually directly mapped to some aspects of this 8. Notice and disclosure, choice and consent. Users should be able to have a consent when you're collecting data. I should have a choice for saying no to something that you're collecting information from me. Data security, safeguards, data quality, and assess, as I said before, information that the company should have to be always right. Recourse and remedy, something goes wrong, who should I go to, what will happen, all that. FTC principles is from the US. So this is OECD, this is FTC. Okay. Safe harbor. So interesting ways of thinking about this idea of safe harbor. Essentially, US, Europe do a lot of business transactions, right? Many comes to India also, but let's think about this. Safe harbor was built for US and EU, so let's just talk about that. So the safe harbor, the information was flowing from US to India, US to EU, and EU to US. So EU basically said that, look, if you want to do business to us, there has to be some way by which I understand that you, a company in the US or an organization in the US, know the expectations of privacy that the EU has. For that, they created the safe harbor, which is US companies self-certify that they are actually taking care of the privacy aspect of the data that is going into the US about EU citizens. Department of Commerce maintains a signatory list. We'll talk about self-certified adherence, which is a company says that I will do this, 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 and they sign, saying I'm taking care of all of this. It's a self-disclosure, another mechanism also, self-regulated mechanism is there, which is organizations comes together, a body comes together and then says that, look, we as a company, we as a industry will follow certain things, and we all agree that we will follow that. Self-regulation, right? This is self-certified. Signatories must provide notice of data collected, purpose, essentially all of the things that we talked about OECD. Notice of data collected, purposes and recipients, choice of opt-out of third-party transfers, opt-in or sensitive data, access rights to delete or edit inaccurate information, security for storage of collected data, enforcement mechanisms of individual companies, compliance. Right? So all of this we saw in OECD, and the company is basically saying, the US company is saying that, look, I'm taking the responsibility for doing, making sure that the data is protected. This is in 2006, that was approved. Right? So that's the one thing that also a topic that comes into discussion when privacy is talked about usually. Let's move on. Let's come to India now. Right? So we took a view of US, EU, and then by the end of the deck, I'll show you what is in around the world, except for these three countries. And now let's look at India specifically. India, interestingly, also has privacy, but they are all sprinkled at some places. The customer data from foreign countries can be protected. So if data is coming from, because one of the biggest questions that at least I end up getting while discussing privacy is that, oh, look, this data is coming from US because we have a company, credit card company, which is outsourcing the data to India for processing and sending back to them something. How is the data getting protected? Particularly this discussion is more relevant is because we don't yet have a privacy law, right? So that's the last part, privacy data protection bill, which I mentioned earlier also. That's in the pipeline, but still we don't have this either sector-specific or the overarching privacy law. So therefore, this question always comes. The way that the companies are managing the privacy today is this list, which is Indian Contract Act. In the contract, you basically say that, look, I will actually do whatever this list is. I could easily put this in a contract and say that, look, I'm doing the analysis for you. I will protect, I will do all of this list and give me now the business. Indian Penal Code has some references to privacy. Self-Relief Act, which is also to do with contracts, some specific ones. Consumer Protection Act, which is to do with, as a user of Flipkart, as a user of, let's take Tata Services, what kind of protection do I have as a consumer? That's what this talks about. IT Act goes into detail of everything, your internet usage, your computer usage, viruses, all of that shows up in IT Act. It also has some references to privacy, possible tort law, which is also reference to privacy again. So Indian contract, one slide per some of this. It's basically looking at everything that goes on in a contract, right? So communication, acceptance of revocations of proposals, communications when complete. So when the contract is completed, what happens? When there's a conflict, what happens? Dispute resolution is a big component of many of these contracts. So when dispute happens, who takes care of what? How does the dispute go about happening? All that. What are the arrangements for contract? Consent defined. See, if you see, we talked about consent earlier, right? So that's the aspect of contract law which talks about privacy, or aligns with some of the discussions of privacy, if you should say. The goal is not to get into each of these contracts. I'm sure if you ask your lawyer friends or judge relatives, they can tell you hours together what these acts and laws are. IPC, which is kind of the overarching way by which many of our laws are regulated is in this case, if you look at it, all of these acts have a component of whatever we discuss, information that they're collecting. So for example, this one, if you see, this is talking about amount of fine, which is accountability aspect of what we said. So that is Indian Penal Code for relevance to privacy that we're talking about, or relevance to the aspects of privacy acts that we're talking about, right? Specific relief. Again, this is also talking about recovery of specific immovable property, which could be a land, real estate, sued by person dispossessed of immovable property. There's a conflict, right? Recovery of specific movable property. All of this has information. All of this has some kind of protection of this data. What happens if the protection does not happen? Right? Specific performance of part of a contract. Again, this is connected to contract. Right? Given the broadness of this topic, and our focus is only the technology side, right? Technology aspect of privacy is what we're interested. So my focus for giving, my intent for giving you is, look, there is acts we should be careful about whenever we're building some things. We should make sure that we are aligned with these laws. Even if there is no law in India for privacy, I think there's a lot of expectations out of technology builders to keep a watch on privacy and make sure that the data is protected, all that. Consumer Protection Act, which is, if you look at it, these are all already we discussed limitation period, how much I give information to Amazon knows that I bought a book. Until when can they keep this information to themselves that I bought this book? Right. IT Act is probably something you should go look at, because IT Act has a lot of relevance to generally things that we do. I think if it's okay, we should actually have some discussion around IT Act in the live session. Right? If any of you are more interested in talking about it, take a look at this document, read the document, skim through it, pick up some ideas, we can discuss in the live session. But the idea of this act is to focus on all aspects of IT. Of course, this should get actually amended more to keep a lot of advanced things that have happened from 2008. 2008 was the first amendment that happened in terms of what all newness that got added to the IT Act. We have put the link to all these laws, acts, everything on the slides. It'll be nice if you can go take a look at it. So data protection bill, again, the goal is who's processing the information, who's collecting the information, how is the information getting shared. So if you read the components of the draft, which is the state of this document right now, is that prohibition of processing personal data, limitation of purpose of personal data, limitation on collection of personal data, requirement of notice for collection or processing of personal data, quality of personal data process, restriction on retention of personal data, right? You collect, how long can you keep? Accountability of data fiduciary, which is again, who's collecting the data, who's processing the data, consent necessary for processing personal data. Just all of this. I mean, I'm emphasizing that you get this idea about, you get the idea that different laws, different acts are actually looking at the same problem we are talking about. GDPR. GDPR I already mentioned, it's the European Union one, and it's one of the advanced privacy protections as of now, where where the definition of privacy is slightly more stringent in that sense, and they have a very strong view on privacy also. Right. So here is an example of what a breach could be on according to GDPR. I think any violations of things that we have already discussed, retention, consent, disclose, limitation, any violation is going to be a breach. But here's one example. Facebook software bug exposed some users' private photographs to app developers. The bug was live for 12 days. And 6.8 million users' data were actually compromised. And this could be a great example for GDPR's expectation. Right? Hope that gives you a sense. Essentially, some data on social media getting compromised. Is this a breach? According to GDPR, yes, it's a breach. One aspect of GDPR, which comes repeatedly during the discussion of GDPR and during the discussion of privacy, is right to be forgotten. This is something that they have been pushing, which is I go to Amazon or I go to makemytrip.com just to check the cost of the price of a flight that I want to take. Right? I don't book even the ticket. Should they keep my information? How long should they keep? There should be a button saying, forget about that, I came to your website. Right? Right to erasure allows individuals to request removal of their personal information from online platforms, search engines, digital databases. It could be Facebook, it could be Google, it could be Make My Trip. The data subject shall have the right to obtain from the controller the erasure of personal data concerning him or her without undue delay, and the controller shall have obligation to erase the data without undue delay. Right? So I make a request to delete the data. Hopefully in some reasonable time the data should get deleted. Here is a couple of discussions like this. Again, can come to live session. We can do longer, but I'll highly recommend you to go take a look at this YouTube. Even the summary. I think summary is like 10 minutes or 12 minutes. This is basically a discussion of Mark Zuckerberg with senators answering questions. Similar thing. There's also one with Sundar Pichai. Both of this, if you look at the summary, I think you'll get a good sense of what happened. And a big reason why we want many of us to understand about privacy is because of these kind of questions that these organizations get. And many of you will end up working for organizations, if not at this level of questions with the senator, somebody can actually ask the question about privacy, about the data that you're collecting. So take a look at these two videos and come back and we can discuss. And that's more like an activity. Meaning I think it will be very interesting for you to read about it. So I had a sort of say fortunate to be part of this sort of say committee which was set up for non-personal data. So until now, what the discussion that we have been having is the personal data, right? There's also discussion that has been happening about non-personal data, which is you're taking Uber from point A to point B. Can Uber share that information that somebody is taking a Uber cab from point A to point B? With that information, can something be done? For example, can you control the signals on the street? Can you, many other examples are also like, can we get information about, let's take agricultural details, water tables, or the kind of crops that farmers sow, and can we get information about that? And let's take the weather information, non-personal data. There's no personal data here, but can you use this to make some societal decisions? And can there be a way by which you can think of organization contributing the data to a place, and that data being used for choices, used for decision making, all that. So the reason why I'm plugging this here is that the whole discussion that we had about is personally identifiable information, right? I'm just saying that there is also an aspect of the data which is non-personal. Right? It is not identifying you by getting that information, but how can you make use of that information? Is there anything that we can do useful with that information is the discussion. As I said earlier, other countries are there, government regulatory approaches, Australia, Canada, Hong Kong, Japan, all of them do. Also heavy discussion on privacy. Singapore is a voluntary mechanism enforced by government. Company says that I'm following, but there's a mechanism by which somebody is overseeing this. Voluntary business generated mechanisms, Institute of Chartered Accountants, privacy framework. There's a lot. For example, there is other types of privacy frameworks also that has come, keeping in mind all the discussion that we have had until now about privacy. So these are all frameworks across the country. Companies, organizations take these policies and implement them. And of course, accountability, everything is placed at some point. If you're interested, take a look at any of these links for other countries' privacy policies, privacy acts. Right? So that brings to the end of privacy laws. Again, my intent here was to give you this view of privacy. Some things we got in detail about FTC principles, OECD guidelines. How does US and EU look at privacy very differently? Where do we stand in India about the current status of privacy, all that. Thanks for listening. Hope to see you in the next lecture.